What's up guys, Sal here. So earlier this year, Samsung decided to use the Snapdragon 865 instead of the usual Exynos on the Galaxy S20 in their own home country, South Korea. This resulted in Samsung's Exynos team being humiliated that their own company doesn't feel their own chipsets are good enough, which in fact is true that it's not good enough compared to the competition. Later, there were some reports that the Exynos team made a new chipset, the Exynos 992 for the Galaxy Note 20, to lessen the performance gap so that Samsung could go back to the Exynos chipset for its home market. But we saw a couple of days ago that they are not using this new chipset for the Galaxy Note 20. Instead, the same Exynos 990 will make an appearance yet again, thereby further increasing that performance gap. Now, there is a new report out of South Korea that Samsung will use the Snapdragon 865 Plus in the Galaxy Note 20 variants in their home turf, South Korea. The main reason for it is said to be the Snapdragon chipset's relatively higher GPU performance than Exynos. So basically, this means markets like Europe, India will be stuck with an Exynos-driven Galaxy Note 20. Now, there's some good news for Europe and India and other Exynos regions that Samsung will also offer the Galaxy Note 20 and Note 20 Ultra in LTE versions, thereby reducing the cost. So the Galaxy Note 20 in Europe and India should cost lower than the Galaxy Note 20 with 5G in the United States and South Korea. 5G networks are still not live in many countries, so it doesn't make sense to sell 5G handsets there. Also, Max tweeted a few days ago that Samsung won't launch the Galaxy Fold 2 at the Unpacked event. Turned out that was wrong. Ice Universe as well as Ross Young tweeted that Samsung will indeed launch the Galaxy Fold 2 at the Unpacked event with a release date on September 20th, at least in China. Apple has to pay Samsung almost $1 billion in a penalty for failing to secure a certain amount of supplies of OLED panels for its new iPhones, falling short of the contract. In other words, Samsung Display is penalizing Apple for not buying enough iPhone displays. Samsung essentially has a monopoly in the mobile OLED panel market. This is why Apple had no choice but to source panels from Samsung Display. Apple has agreements with Samsung that allow it to purchase display components for a lower price per unit, but they'll have to make a minimum purchase in return. But 2020 happened and sales collapsed, which prevented Apple from reaching that minimum order target. So as a result, Samsung Display now wants Apple to pay a penalty for missing its minimum order quantity. This is not the first time Apple had to pay a penalty fee to Samsung. In Q2 of 2019, Apple was also charged for purchasing fewer OLED displays than agreed. This isn't simply a case of Samsung being greedy. Apparently, Samsung invested millions in redesigning manufacturing plants specifically to meet Apple's expected needs. Since Apple sells hundreds of millions of iPhones each year, so you understand the scale we are talking about here. With Apple not meeting the required order quantity, it doesn't seem fair for Samsung to make those investments for nothing. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people, particularly Apple fans, saying $1 billion is a pocket change for Apple. Listen, I agree Apple makes a lot of money, even more than Samsung, but $1 billion is not pocket change by any means, not even for Apple. That same pocket change of $1 billion was the purchase price of the entire Intel 5G modem division, or about 1/3 of the purchasing price of Beats by Dre. $1 billion is an awful amount of money to lose on a breach of agreement, period. Of course, with that being said, for all the latest updates on the smartphone tech, please consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace out.